The topic selected for today's session is conservation and management of natural resources. Around the world, there is an environmental crisis, there is food crisis, there is energy crisis, there is water crisis, and there is a population crisis. The population is exploding beyond control, and it is placing heavy demands on the available resources. The resources, that is the natural resources, are depleting at an alarming rate. Plants and animals are disappearing. This pollution of air, water and soil. Till yesterday, we knew there was a little sparrow, but where has it gone? So, what was available yesterday is not seen today. This is really an alarming situation. What will happen to our future citizens, that is our children who will become future citizens, if we continue to consume at this alarming rate? And to discuss this important subject, we have invited two eminent scholars to our discussion panel. On my extreme left, we have Professor V. Venkateswarlu. He is a retired professor from Osmania University, Hyderabad. On my left is Dr. S.K. Balachandar. He is a reader in botany. Sir, may I ask you this question, sir? Please make it very clear to our students, what is a resource?
Any material which is highly valuable and more useful is termed a resource. Example, land, water, minerals, ores, etc. Every thing that comes from nature which has got useful or utility value to the mankind is called a natural resource. Example, land, sunlight, forests, wildlife. These are some of the examples which are come under the natural resource. Recently, World Resource Institute in America, Worldwide Fund for Nature, and British scientists working on natural resources have reported that the existing resources are dwindling very fast because they are utilized at a very faster rate. And if the situation continues, then the earth may expire by 2050 by human plundering. Keeping this all in view, it is highly desirable to conserve the available natural resources and utilize them economically whenever they are needed. In fact, the natural resources are divided into two types, the renewable and non-renewable. The renewable resources include the forests, the water, solar energy, etc. The non-renewable resources, they include the minerals and such materials. But whenever apart from this, they can also be categorized under three types: the biotic, abiotic and cyclic. The biotic ones, that is coming from living materials, for example coal and mineral oils, they come under the biotic, whereas the abiotic ones include the minerals, ores, metals, etc. the cyclic resources include the polluted waters, which can be purified and recycled, and they can be reused.
So, thank you, sir. Now, Balachandra, can you tell us what is conservation?
Yeah. If you take the 21st century as implied, we are living in an age of exponential growth. We seem to be losing out on resources because of high population. There is a conflict between population and natural resources, and all of a sudden we are at a very alarming rate because we have never used so much of resources in the entire history of mankind. So, conservation is a very broad based concept. It is an approach, or it is an ethic, or it is an attitude towards managing natural resources. It primarily lays emphasis on how do you understand complex issues, because in ecology everything is interconnected. Ecology is the science of interconnected. We require a multidisciplinary or a pluralistic approach, and when we are talking in terms of biological diversity on one side, that is the variability and the variety of living organisms on one issue, and we look again in terms of what we are trying to conserve. At the same time, there is also the sort of a challenge of exploitation of natural resources. So, it is a balance between conservation and change. Hence, conservation biology and conservation ecology are two important streams which are recently emerging as an answer to the biodiversity crisis. And a easy way would be to focus on the exponential. This is the diagram which indicates we are living in an age of exponential age, and in an age of exponential age suddenly we find that we are on leading with relation to there is a loss of a lot of natural resources on one side, and there are a lot of questions here, which is all of a sudden we are on a sort of a graph which says it is all leading in. And again when we go to the second diagram here, it primarily indicates that there is a link between solar energy and natural resources. The natural resource capital is to be taken into consideration. So, till now what happened is the world has been leading with relation to economic development. Today it says that natural resource capital and solar energy are linked together, and the different renewables and non-renewables are all connected out here. Whatever Dr. Venkateshwarlu just spoken, it is all connected over here. So, there is a need, suddenly there is a need to conserve our natural resources, and every context with relation to natural resource is very, very unique.
Okay. Now, conservation and sustainable, what is sustainable development?
Sustainable development is development wherein environment and development are linked together. It is not a conflict between environment and development versus development, but it is an issue wherein you manage the resources in an very rational way, wherein a part of the resource is used for the present generation and part of it is inherited for the future generation. Thereby, just like you preserve the sort of a capital along with the sort of an interest, and the natural resource capital grows off like a sort of a recurring deposit. And again, so in sustainable development, it is between the generations, it is intergenerational. Like you take the rich countries and the poor countries, how they look at the resources, and it is also intragenerational between the different components of the same country or between different states. And it is also inherited in such a way that there is always the capital builds up on renewable energies. So, suddenly there is a lot of talk with relation to renewable resources, renewable energy and natural resources, and sustainable development is something like a sort of a magic butterfly. If you ask me, people are on to sustainable development because all of a sudden they feel we are losing the biological resources, we are losing the natural capital, and we need to take stock with relation to our natural resource capital, because this is where the biological diversity is in the 21st century.
Well, water among all the natural resources is the most important resource. It is regarded as a pillar of our civilization, and it is a natural renewable resource. But unfortunately, due to population explosion, the existing water resources are getting exhausted, and according to recent publication in current science, India's population is going to touch 1,640 million mark, and the existing water resources have to be tripled. That means 3 times until and unless these existing water resources are multiplied, it is very difficult to meet the demands of the ever growing population. Well, water is very useful and essential. According to our National Water Policy 2002, water is used on priority basis for drinking, irrigation, industrial and hydroelectric power generation. Apart from this, well, water is also used for transport, navigation, fishing, etc. Well, I think it is because of global warming due to increase in temperature. This the ice is melting and it's slowly moving, and if there is a lot of ice melting, definitely the environment also will have a lot of consequences. The oceans, the level of the oceans may rise and also cause a lot of havoc in future. Wetland is defined as the land which is immersed or inundated in water, either fresh water or salt water, 6 meters deep. They are either perennial or seasonal, etc. Examples include the salt marshes, swamps, lagoons, and even permanent water bodies, and the common examples are the Kolleru Lake, Chilka Lake, Pulicat Lake. All these are the examples of the wetlands. These wetlands are very important economically, they are also very useful, and in this study, especially they are very useful in the sense for the migratory birds, because during certain times of the year the birds visit and complete their life cycle, and when the conditions become unfavorable, they just leave that particular habitat and fly to some other place. As and when the conditions become favorable, they again visit these wetlands. Besides that, the wetlands also are useful in the treatment of industrial wastes or waste waters, because these waste waters, if they are allowed to enter these wetlands, of course first dilution, and afterwards whatever the biological material that is there, it will help in the purification of the waste waters. So this is what is called root zone technology. This is especially helpful in the treatment of waste containing heavy metals. The metals will be absorbed by the roots, and they will not reach the upper part of the plant, and when once the heavy metals get accumulated in the roots, and those roots can be destroyed, that's how they can be used in the treatment of these industrial waste effluents.
India has got centrally we have Rajasthan and Gujarat, which are very good places for grasslands, and grassland management is a very important issue. Primarily, if you take tropical grasslands as well as even temperate grasslands, they are the places which are very, very important. I mean, primarily with urbanization, etc. There has been a situation wherein where it's gone into cultivation, there has been urbanization, there has been soil degradation, again there had been the threat for grassland birds, and again there is fragmentation of habitats, as well as even some non-native species called exotics are coming into grasslands, and wildlife populations of birds and also species are on the decline. This is the actual scenario of what is happening to grasslands. Now, grasslands are also very important, like we know the crisis situation, and what we have lost is, why are grasslands very important? Grasslands are important for the sake of food, for the sake of forage and livestock, for biological diversity, as well as for carbon storage. That's a very important it's a large sink for carbon storage. Grasslands are important places for tourism, for recreational ecology. So, for recreational ecology, it comes as a place for revenue addition for both private as well as for the government sector, and it is being threatened by cultivation, urbanization, fire and invasive species. This is a new important concept which all students need to understand. Whenever we introduce an exotic, a species which comes from the outside, it competes with the local species, and thereby the species do not grow. Hence, when you look at grasslands, the loss of native revegetation is one very important sort of a consequence of bad natural resource management. Again, the introduction of invasive species or exotic species also can lead to degradation of grasslands, and it can also enable the soil profile to be lost. So, the ways how we can overcome this in simple is, we practice rotational grazing. Rotational grazing is, you do revegetational studies and also see to that the same species is rotated year by year with relation to in time and space. And again, we also need to do a very important biodiversity inventory of grasslands. This is the need of the hour, wherein people should have a good knowledge of taxonomy and also should have a good understanding of ecological succession of grasslands. And again, we also need to know what is the relationship between grasses and woodlands or forest trees. So, thereby a very important thing which I also agree with Dr. Venkateshwarlu is, the annual grasslands are the regions of the future watersheds. So, if we want to go for conservation based on watersheds, grasslands are very, very important. And again, in a country like ours, when you take central India, we have several threatened species which are all in the arid and in the semi-arid habitats of the Indian subcontinent. Thus, in simple, the message for grasslands is, we need to renew, we need to restore the native species, we need to reuse as well as recycle the local species, which I feel is a very important link in the grassland ecosystem.
Another area where degradation is seen is the forests.
Yeah.
Now, we do not have the requisite forest cover in this country.
Yes.
So, what should be done about this?
Yeah.
Why is this taking place?
Yes. See, in a country with lot of population, poverty and pollution, with the depleting natural resources, it's a paradox that we have to be cutting trees again. I would put it in from a different sort of a perspective. You take the temperate countries. In the temperate countries, majority of the nutrients are present in the soils. Mm-hmm. And when they fell a particular tree, nothing really happens to the soils. Whereas in tropical countries, most of the nutrients are locked in the tree biomass. So, even the loss of a single tree in a forest enables you to lose a lot of nutrients. So, it is a question of mixed priorities. We seem to be following the West. I very unorthodoxly or in a different sort of way, I just put it like this. We need to primarily go in for rehabilitation of degraded lands. Yes. That's, we have a lot of wastelands and wasted lands. So, rehabilitation of degraded lands is the priority of priorities. And again, whenever it comes to forestry, forestry should be linked to people. Community forestry, joint forest management or participatory forestry is the issue. In all issues of natural resource management, people are at the center of concerns. It's the people's priorities. It should be linked to livelihoods. We should be doing it on a bottom to the top or a participatory approach. Gender should be given priority. And we understand that loss of forests is very, very important because it can bring about local climatic change. There can be loss of the gene pool. There can be extinction of the species. Mm-hmm. There can be fragmentation of the habitats. there could also be topsoil erosion, there could be denudation of the landscapes. So thereby the importance of rehabilitation or getting back the sort of a forest is, there are 2 or 3 different ways. One is involving the people, let it be a sort of a people's movement at the local level. And the second thing is, even biotechnology and tissue culture can solve the problems when we go for large scale plantation of forest trees. But initially it is essential that we know the revegetational dynamics and also the community ecology of the forest species. And it is here that the role of NGOs, the role of environmental education, as well as even other conservation issues come in. Definitely in a tropical country, forests play a very significant role, and forests are very essential. They constitute the lung space for the earth. If ever we require to breathe in, we require the forests.
Now, among the forests, in the forest ecosystem, as you all know, there are also animals living. You have the reptiles, you have the tigers, you have the deers, rabbits, all sorts of animals. It is a mix of plants and animals. Even as the forest is being cut, the animals are also facing danger.
Yeah.
The tigers and lions are coming out into the open and they find where to hide, so they are attacking the human beings. So what do you think about wildlife conservation? Yeah. Dr. Balchandar.
Yeah, I feel that wildlife conservation is a very dynamic as well as a very complex issue. The reason why we need to conserve, if someone asks why conserve a tiger, why conserve one species in a big habitat, maybe it might puzzle a lot of students as well as people. The prime aim of conservation in the context of wildlife, to put it in very simple words, is we require to take up issues in conservation and management on a holistic basis. It need not be on a piecemeal basis. A holistic basis implies we have a social attitude. We require to look at it from the viewpoint of aesthetics, economics, and again we need to exactly ask ourselves, why do we need to conserve? Conservation and preservation are 2 important areas of restoration ecology. So in the context of wildlife conservation, when we say restoration ecology, it could mean conservation of a single species, it could mean conservation of the habitats, or it could be conservation of the biosphere. At this moment, let me share a few thoughts. Biosphere conservation in a country like ours has got ample opportunities in terms of careers and again in terms of priority of priorities. So let's come to the question of why conserve in wildlife biology. I'll give you, maybe if you can just share a few reasons. The first important reason is utilitarian. That is, what do people get, what do human beings get when they conserve a particular species? How is it going to be useful for mankind? Name it a sort of a lizard or an insect or a spider or a mammal or a bird. Every time what happens is we live in a world of biological diversity, and as Dr. Saraswati Rao has always emphasized, there are a lot of food webs and food chains in an ecosystem. The ecosystem is the basis, and we are, as a sort of a race, we are advancing on technology and biotechnology. The reasons why we need to conserve species is, can we get any sort of a genes from them? Can we get any sort of a natural products from them? Is it possible that these particular species, both plants, animals and microbes, and also from wildlife, can they have any aesthetic value? Can they be a part of ecotourism? So all these comes under utilitarian aspect. The second aspect of wildlife conservation refers to ecological. What are the ecological needs for conservation? Ecological needs for conservation is for ecosystem goods and services. So what do we get if we conserve a tiger? We get a sort of a habitat, and what do we get when we conserve a habitat? We can conserve the millions of plants, animals, microbes, etc. And as again, in all issues of wildlife conservation, it should be people centered. Like you take the You take the issue of conservation of the Asian elephant. Conservation of Asian elephant has been done by Dr. Sukumar at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and primarily the ecology and management practices would mean, are you regulating, are you monitoring the population size of elephants? What is the viable population size of the elephants? What is the habitat area? What is the size of the population? What is the integrity of the habitat? What is the quality of the habitat? See, these are the different dimensions in which we need to be thinking in terms of wildlife conservation. Are we reducing the sort of a poaching? How do we do captive breeding? And what other the places, the buffer zones? So, in addition to the ecological values, if wildlife conservation should also be linked to the people's tradition, cultures and values. We can't get a Western model of wildlife conservation and put it in the Indian context. It never really works. So again, what are the aesthetic values? How do communities near a national park or near a biosphere reserve, how do they see into this? We require again sustainable communities, and the concept is everything is connected. So wildlife conservation is a strange mix, or it is the judicious mix of multidisciplinary thinking, pluralistic approaches, wherein different cultures, different values, different aesthetics meet. And the challenge in wildlife conservation is always, and in most of the times, there is a conflict between nature and nurture. And definitely when a particular species or when a population is being extinct, we need to ask, is it the local population? Is it the local species? And whenever we are dealing with relation to extinction, we require to exactly understand what is the conflict between population, natural resources, natural habitats, and it's a very complex area. But at the same time, given the biogeographical zones of India and given the variability in terms of biological diversity, in terms of species, in terms of genera, in terms of ecosystems, wildlife conservation is extremely important. It is priority, and it's got a lot of challenges. I mean, each situation is very unique, each situation is very complex, each situation changes. Thereby, students who are going to major with relation to plant sciences, ecology and all that, they definitely have a lot of future, and they need to understand the complexities. It's just not a sort of a very shallow issue, but we need to understand it in the context of issues and in the context of processes.
So, there is a need to incorporate environmental education into the present scheme of education, so that the future citizens can make ecologically sound decisions to prevent pollution, protect health and save all forms of life.